Good morning, and welcome to the LOVTalk Podcast, where our conversations will always be real, raw, and relevant. I am your host, Pastor Carmen Acosta, and on this podcast, I will be sitting down with pastors, friends, professionals, and associates to have conversations on topics that are vital to our lifeline and well-being. Joining me in the studio today is the #1 best-selling author, international speaker, philanthropist, lawyer, and pastor, Kaye Holmes. Thank you for joining me today, Mary.
Thank
I'm
you
so
for
excited
having
to
me.
have you here. Mary is a sought-after, trusted authority on life after adversity. She is a survivor of human trafficking, domestic abuse, molestation, rape, incarceration, and multiple suicide attempts. She speaks from the heart concerning real-life issues and plagued survivors of trauma and adverse childhood experiences. She is also the founder of Zecomo Life Ministries, Inc., and co-founder of Waterbury Community Action Network, providing resources to underprivileged and marginalized youth and families in the U.S. and abroad. In all that she has accomplished, her greatest joy is spreading the message of hope and resilience so that others will know that they too can survive and thrive beyond adversity. Her full bio can be viewed on our website at LOVCT.org. Mary, you and your husband also pastor a church in Waterbury. Can you tell us a little bit about the church as well?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for having me. This is really, really an honor. And yes, we pastor a church in Waterbury, Connecticut, Triumph Christian Center. And it's a wonderful congregation where we really focus on helping people overcome everyday life issues. And so that's what kind of helped us to launch the nonprofit part of what we do and the missions that we do abroad. And so my husband, he's a senior pastor, and I work alongside him and helping him to run the ministry.
That's so wonderful because, Waterbury has its little difficult or tough neighborhood. And,
Yes.
you see it a lot in the news. So it's nice that you have launched that community nonprofit to help. Do you work with the youth in that area, or is it just for adults, anyone?
Men, women, children, families, everything that we can do. A lot of what we do really is mainly like supplying basic needs in the community,
Okay.
being able to give people hygiene products,
That's
food
nice.
and clothing.
Yes.
That's one of our main initiatives, and every year we do back to school giveaways and things like that because we want to help offset the cost of families and be able to help them to thrive because a lot of people sometimes even if they don't qualify for state assistance, some people if they make a little bit too much but they're still in that middle, they're struggling, they don't qualify for the assistance.
Yeah.
So we want to help people to have like
Just
the
kind of
clothes, food, and basic
supplement.
need. Yeah, supplement. And so that's one of the main things we do in the Waterbury community. Of course, spreading the gospel,
Yeah.
spreading hope, and letting people know that
Yeah.
even though life gets tough,
Yeah.
because life happens,
Yes.
and we're here to just let people know that they can overcome it. That we've been there, that we might not look like we've been there, but
Right.
we've been there,
Yeah.
and we want to just spread that message of hope that they can overcome.
It reminds me of a saying that my husband always says, you see the glory, but you don't know the story.
Exactly.
That's what we're all
Exactly.
about, right? But I am excited about our conversation today, and I think it's just so fitting with everything that you have been through in your life, and I'm just so enamored by your testimony and your resilience to just have come through. And today, looking at the story, looking at the glory, you wouldn't know the story of all the events that happened to you. And hopefully we'll have enough time to get into it. But I've titled this, We're Never Too Far Gone for God to Recover Us.
Yes.
And it reminds me, I think about what Jeremiah 30:17 says, where it says, I will give you back your health and healed your wounds, says the Lord, for you are called an outcast, Jerusalem, for whom no one cares. And I know in our conversation that there were times where you felt that no one cared, you were an outcast, and you went through so much. But, I want our listeners and our viewers to know that even in our times where we feel in our life that it's too late for God to do anything with us, It's never too late.
Never too late.
Never. He says that he will never leave us. He will never forsake us. You know, we tend to put, I think, God in the scheme of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And we translate emotions the same way with him and us in our relationship. And he's God.
Yes.
His love for us is not the same conditional love that we have for others, right?
Exactly.
And so, you know, I want our audience, our listeners, and our viewers to just kind of get a feel for a little bit about what's happened in your life and the journey that you had to take, and what that's done for you today.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so much. And like you
I
said, I
know.
hope we have time. We will have time because I think I've mastered the art of shortening the story so much.
Even if we
because
go
there's so
over,
much.
I'm not concerned.
There's so much that God has brought me through. And it's a blessing to be able to even talk about it and be able to smile. To me, that's one of the biggest miracles about how God has blessed me. You know, about my
Yes.
testimony is that the fact that I can still talk about it and not feel the bitterness, not feel resentment, not feel anger, and to have forgiveness after everything that I've
That's all
experienced.
key to
Yeah.
a healthy. And you know what? I hope whoever is listening to us will really stick with the conversation and not, you know, walk away, because I think what you have been through and where you are today is pivotal for so many others out there. And I'm not going to say just women,
Yeah.
for all people out there.
Right. Yeah. And for me, I think that the Lord he used the story in such a way that because I went through so many different things, it's hard for me to meet somebody that's gone through a traumatic situation and not be able to relate to them in some way.
Sure.
It's like, you know,
You've had a little bit of everything.
a little bit of everything. Yeah. So starting at the age of 4, an older relative molested me as a child, and it continued throughout my childhood years. And so that traumatized me in a way where I started to rebel and started to exhibit these behavioral issues, and no one knew what I was going through. And so I started to act out like a lot of children do, because at that age you can't really express your feelings the way you want to. You're not able to articulate what's going on in the inside, and there was a lot of self-blame. And so by the time I was 14, I was pregnant. And my mom and my boyfriend at the time, his mom, they made us get an abortion. And so I went through that. And then by the time I was 15, I met the first person who trafficked me. And he was 36 years old. And I was 15 in high school. And he convinced me that he was the answer to all of my problems, that he was the answer to me getting out of, a bad neighborhood, to breaking poverty off my life. He gave me money, he bought me clothes and shoes and just showered me with all of this affection. And then before I knew it, I'm locked inside of his small 1-bedroom apartment in Middletown, Connecticut on Route 66. Wasn't able to contact my family, wasn't able to use the telephone, wasn't able to leave out of the house. It was like this condo kind of building where if you left out of the building, the door would lock behind you. And so he instilled this fear in me that if I left out of the house, that, he would, abuse me, which he eventually started to do. And so with that time that he had me kind of locked away and isolated from my family, he started to control me and manipulate me and brainwash me.
Okay.
And so for years, it took me 7 years to escape from that relationship.
So you were in your 20s by the time you escaped.
Right. And so it was
7
like
years.
yeah. And so to go from being in high school to coming out of that in my early 20s, there was a lot I just didn't know, and I wasn't healed. I was very broken and depressed and battling social anxiety and afraid of people, afraid to talk to people, afraid to look people in the eye. And so I ran right into the arms of a man who was a pimp. And he ended up prostituting me and had me in clubs dancing for money and handing all the money over to him. And he began to become verbally and physically abusive as well. And so because I hadn't healed from the first situation, it was easy for him to cause me to become re-victimized, which happens to a lot of trafficking survivors. They become re-victimized.
So when you left after that 7 years, where did you go that you met this person?
Well, I was on my own at the time. I had my 2 children, and so I was
So
living
you
alone.
had 2 children
Two
in
children.
those 7 years
Within those 7 years, I had 2 children
from this
from the first
individual.
person. Yes.
Okay.
And so I'm living on my own, single, working, and struggling, and going through all the financial troubles that you hear a lot of single moms go through, especially
Right.
being a young single mom that's still trying to figure out who she is.
Right.
And so I had this identity crisis. And like I said, I was very afraid of people and had that anxiety. And so it was easy for him when he met me to start to make me feel as if he was the answer. Once again, like he was
Somebody,
the answer to
yeah.
he was the escape from all the problems. And so when I met him, it was at a club. And so he wound up taking advantage of me and making me feel as if he was an answer or a solution when he really was the biggest problem I could have had at that time, and wound up taking advantage of my vulnerability. So people like that,
But
they can sniff it out a mile away.
Yeah, they can. And especially if you're broken, you're so desperate, I think, at that point that you just want somebody to love you.
Exactly.
You want somebody to help you.
Right.
Your heart is soft to receive.
Yeah.
Whatever you can, So
Right. I
that's-
wrote in my book that every embrace feels like acceptance at that point. And you can't tell the difference between the embrace and when someone's trying to control you by holding you close. And so by him holding me close by control, I felt like he was protecting me, or that he was looking out for me, or trying to show me this better life. But it was all dysfunctional.
Yeah.
And dysfunctional is an understatement, but
Yeah.
and it really breaks my heart when I hear people talk about what they call the pimp game, because it's not a game. People view a lot of the women that are in the streets as being able to make their own choices, or they're choosing to be in the clubs, or they're choosing to sell their bodies. But a lot of times there's someone behind the scenes that's manipulating the situation,
Tell
that's
us the
got
truth,
them
man.
brainwashed.
Yeah.
And what woman in her right mind would make all of this money selling her body and then turn around and give it all to a man who has not put his life at risk, who's sitting back just pulling the strings? And that's because these women are broken, they're lost, they need hope, they need help, they don't have the resources. And a lot of times people blame them for the position that they find themselves in. And so that was where I was at that point. But thank God that one day things just went too far with the beatings and with him taking the money. And one day it was like I just had this awakening, and I just it literally one day it was like my eyes open, and I realized this man is using you. You have 2 children, you have a life to live for them. You could be out here one day and something could happen to you, and nobody will know where you are. Nobody will know what happened. And I just decided I have to get out of this. So I left my apartment, found another place, downgraded, and in this little 1-bedroom apartment where I gave my boys the bedroom, I slept on the couch in the living room, changed my phone number, and I got out and I got into the church. And I began to really start to go to Bible study, learn more about God.
Did you know anything about God in your life before all of this started?
I did. I grew up in church. So
Oh,
my mother raised me in church. She always
Okay.
kept us, it was one of those churches where everything from being a junior missionary to being on the junior usher board to being in the choir and the youth groups. I was very involved in church as a young person.
Okay.
But when the first man who trafficked me isolated me from my family, he also isolated me from my faith. And so I wasn't allowed to pray in the house. I wasn't allowed to pray with our children. I definitely wasn't allowed to go to church. And he brainwashed me to the point where he made me feel as if that what I grew up believing was not real.
It's all false.
Yeah,
There
that
is
it was
no
a-
God. He
there's
doesn't
no-
care
yeah.
about you.
Yep, and
I
I
had
started
one of
to
those
feed into that.
tormentors in my life.
Yeah, torment is
Yeah.
the perfect word.
It's
to
really
use.
what it is.
Yeah.
And you carry that until you're delivered.
Yeah, anything that could have been a lifeline, he cut off. And so I found myself, struggling with what I believed and what was real, and was God real? Was Jesus really God? And
Yeah.
Was he just a man and a great teacher and all of these other gods that are out there? How do we know which one is real? And I started to question everything that I was raised to believe. And I'm so thankful to God, because God will allow you to have experiences for yourself, to where he will visit you in a way where it's undeniable, where when I started to lose that hope or trying to figure out, okay, is God real? He began to give me experiences where I knew, okay, God is speaking to me.
Oh,
For
okay.
example,
Okay.
when the first time I attempted suicide, I was 14 years old. But since then, I had attempted suicide 5 different times. But that 5th time, I cried out to God and I said, Lord, I do not want, I'm a screw up. I feel like I'm making a mess of life.
I'm too far gone. There's no hope.
Exactly. Okay. I'm too far gone. And that's why I love the topic, because that's literally what I felt. I felt like I messed up big time. There's no coming back from this. And so, because I had been isolated from my family so long that the relationships were strained, I really felt alone. Felt I was a horrible mom. And so I wanted to take my life. And I told the Lord, I said, if you don't stop me, I'm going to do this. Yeah. I was like, I feel like such a failure. I can't even, I'm on my 5th time and I still can't succeed at that.
Oh my goodness. It sounds like a conversation that I had with the Lord the day I got born again.
Oh my goodness.
So it's amazing. But go on.
And so I said, you got to intervene. But if you don't intervene, I'm doing this. And I said, okay, I can't swim. So I'm going to drive to Beardsley Park. And unfortunately, you hear stories about so many people who have lost their lives in that body of water right there.
I found one myself as a little kid.
Yeah, it was, oh my goodness. So I said, I'm going to drive into this water, and that's how I'm going to do it. So on the way there, I said, something just said, go to Bible study first. Maybe that's where God will intervene. Maybe you'll hear something. Oh. And so I stopped at the church and I parked my car and walked into the church. And as soon as I get inside, one of the evangelists pulls me to the side. Before I can even really get like a really good foot in the door, she says, how are you doing? And of course, we always give the usual generic, everything's fine, you know. And she says, I don't know why I feel led to tell you this, but I remember one day I felt like taking my life. And she began to give me her testimony. I've never heard Evangelist, at the time, she's still there, Evangelist Maria, I never heard her tell her testimony, but that day she felt led to share it with me. So I'm like, okay, I know God is speaking to me. Yeah. This must be God. Yeah. But I go downstairs to the bathroom and I begin to wipe my tears. And I'm telling God, why do I still want to die? I know that you're intervening, but why do I still want to go? Yeah. So I leave out, after Bible study's over, I leave out the doors and I have 2 flat tires. And so now, I wanted to drive to Beardsley Park. So it's like, God is like, no, you're not going anywhere.
Yeah, you got 2 flat tires.
Yeah. So I'm like, not 1, but 2. They're just sitting like on the same side. And I said, okay. And to make a long story short, I knew that God wanted to intervene, and I saw him intervening, but I could not figure out, well, why do I still feel this way? And so I told God, I said, if I don't want to do anything with my life, if I'm done with this, I just give it to you. You do something with it, because I can't do
Bingo.
This. Yeah.
Those were the words.
Yes, exactly. I was like, you do something. And boy, has he done something with it. He has taken my life.
From that point on?
Yes, from that point forward, because, things got worse before they got better, but that happens. Sometimes God has to take you through a process, because if he gives you everything at once,
it's a cleansing.
You don't know how to handle it.
Right. How many years were you living in darkness? And now you have to go through the journey of getting to that place of light, holiness, that purity. That's a cleansing process. Yeah. You're headed towards the light. You see the light at the end of the tunnel, but you have to get yourself there. You have to walk to the end of that tunnel. Yeah. And in the process, there may be ditches, puddles, rivers, you name it.
Yeah, there were some times when I really started to feel like I'm doing everything you said to do. I'm going to church. I'm going to Bible study. You know how it is when you have a church and it could be filled, but the Bible study is always just a handful. Yeah. And I would say to myself, I don't care who else is there at the prayer meetings. When it's time to fast and pray, when it's time for Bible study, I'm going to be in place. When my bishop goes out to preach, I'm going to make sure I'm one of the few that are there, because when he looks out, he's going to know that he has support. And I was trying to be a servant and faithful and cleaning the bathrooms at the church and and enjoyed it, because I didn't do it grudgingly. I really just enjoyed serving God. Yeah. And things were still going wrong. And I was like, Lord, I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do. And
when you say it was going wrong, what, not to get, just what was it that wasn't right for you?
Still financially struggling, still going through with my children. With my children's father, he was still trying to find ways to control and to, make me feel as if I was a bad mom. And then eventually he took my children away from me. And so that was the catalyst when I was like, okay, Lord, now really, this is the worst that could have happened to me at that time. And I said, I'm trying to do everything right. And when I lost my children, I did not lose my faith. And I'm so grateful
Yeah.
because people couldn't figure out, why is she still here praising God,
Yeah.
going through the worst season in her life? Yes, the prostitution was bad. Yes, the trafficking was bad. Yes, all of those things were horrible. But as
your
a mom,
babies, yeah. There's no
that
description for that.
and when I tell you, I would come to church and I would still serve and I would still work and I would still praise God. And I'm sure people were wondering, like, how is she doing this? But I was going home having these private conversations with God, like, Lord, like, you come on, like,
Yeah.
help me out. You got to come through. And I believed that he would, but it was hard. It was really difficult. But one day, I started to resort back to old habits. And it wasn't really one day. We say one day, but it was really, over the course of time, you slowly start to lose a little. You have the faith, but you start to,
Yeah.
do things that are
The
coping.
fruition of,
Yeah.
a period just all of a sudden is exposed.
Yeah, coping mechanisms
Yes.
and bad habits and things that you didn't realize you weren't healed from. Because I thought, I was just moving forward and not really digging at the root and saying, I need to go back and uproot some things too.
Yeah, I think sometimes, and this is just my own experience and talking to other women, it's like, you see the rug? We just lift it up and we put it in there. And
Yep.
because we don't see what's underneath that rug,
Right.
we think we're okay. The rug is
Yeah.
okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah.
how we do. We just kind of have a way to cope, just kind of bury it in the heart there, let it get forgotten somewhere in that tunnel there. But then, like you say, it creeps up, and it creeps up always at the most inopportune time, right?
Yeah.
When you think you're at the end of your race, you get tripped over.
Right, because of stuff that we didn't deal with. And, I always say, and I think I heard my husband say it first, and I just took it from him. But, he said, if you don't deal with your issues will deal with you.
Yeah.
And so that's exactly
That's
what
the
happened. And that's why I wound up serving time in prison, because it was old habits that had resurfaced, things that I hadn't healed from, things that I had learned over the years that I had picked up on, that I resorted back to because I was struggling. And it was also because I was coping with the loss of my children, trying to compensate and find some sense of like control in my life. Because when you feel like you lose control and you haven't healed,
Sure.
you'll
You're
resort to
grasping
unhealthy.
for
Yes, you're
anything you can that makes
Right.
you feel like, okay, I got this.
Exactly. And when I tell you prison was the best thing for me at that time,
Oh, really?
let me tell you how God worked this out. Because while I'm questioning, like, okay, Lord, how can you come through? I feel like he used that as an opportunity. He's like, okay, I need you to sit still for a moment so you can hear me clearly. And when I wound up in prison, I went in for the sentencing for my court date. And when they sentenced me, they took me downstairs into a holding cell. And this was before they were going to transport me off to the state prison in Niantic. And so in that holding cell, it's, like what you would imagine, like what you would see on TV, the bars and the metal bench and the stone bench and then the metal sink and really closed up space. And I'm in there by myself and I'm just like praying to God and I'm scared. I'm like, I don't know what to expect. I'm not cut out for this. I don't belong here. What am I doing here? How did I get here? And I'm questioning all of these things. And there's another woman that they bring in who's already in prison. Okay. And she looks rough. Oh my goodness. She looked tough. She looked rough. But she was there to have her case heard. So she was only going to be in that cell for me for a small window of time.
Okay.
And before they just hauled her back into to her prison. And so while she was there, I said, I'm not going to say a word. I'm not going to say, because I don't know the rules yet. Do you make eye contact? Do you not?
Yeah.
Do you say anything? I don't know. I don't know what to. So I said, I am not going to say a word. And she turns to me because we were in there silent for I don't know how many hours. And then she finally turned to me and she said, what are you in here for? The usual question that you probably would imagine is asked,
Yes.
And so when I began to share with her, I didn't just tell her why I was there. For the first time in my adult life or forever, I started to share my testimony for the first time because I couldn't just tell her, okay, I'm in here for this, this, and that. I had to tell her how I got there. So I told her about the man who trafficked me. And at the time, I didn't even know that I was being trafficked. I didn't know that wasn't a part of the language.
No.
So I was able
it's
to.
the language today,
right.
but
But back then, I didn't know.
It's just prostitution, right?
Yeah. I didn't even know what it was until I was maybe 36.
Oh.
And so for years I said, okay, I was a prostitute, but no, I was forced into that.
Yeah.
And so, I began to share with her everything that from the childhood molestation all the way up until that point and losing my children. And she began to break down. And she said, oh my goodness, I lost my children too. And then she began to tell me I told her about the suicide attempts. And I didn't just tell her the story. I gave her the testimony in the sense of, I went through this, but God has brought me out. And I began to minister. I wasn't preaching at the time. I wasn't a minister. But my bishop had planted a seed. He told me before I went in there, because I had told them what happened and they prayed for me and everything. And he said, when you go into this prison, there's going to be somebody that you are going to have to minister to.
Oh.
Yes.
So you already had that seed in your heart.
And so I began to pour out, and I had never done this before. And she began to cry, and she began to tell me how she lost her children, how she also, there was a point in her life where she wanted to take her life. And she lifted up her head and she pointed from ear to ear and she showed me this scar. And she said, I wanted to take my life so bad I slit my own throat. Yes, I had the same reaction. I was like, oh, it gave me chills.
Yeah, how do you do
And
that?
she just, like this woman who looked so tough, just began to break down. And I told her, I said, I was supposed to meet you. And she said, you were. She said, your bishop was right. Your pastor was right. I'm the one that you were supposed to meet. And that was the beginning of ministry for me, like the literal beginning in that prison cell, in the bottom of that courthouse on Golden Hill, whatever it is in Bridgeport. In that courthouse downstairs was where ministry began for me. And God showed me, this is your purpose. This is why I have you here. This is why you went through everything you've gone through, to not just tell people what you've gone through, because the testimony is good, but it's not good enough. The testimony has to also point people back to him and show them that there's
Absolutely.
hope. Like, yes, I can tell my story and people can be wowed. Oh my goodness, like you went through that. But I have to tell them, like, okay, this is what I went through, but this is the way out. This is what I went through, but this is how God brought me out. And there's hope for you too. So that God is just amazing how he'll, Romans 8:28, he'll cause all things to work together for the good of them who love the Lord and are the called according to his purpose.
He takes our mess and makes it a message for salvation.
Yes.
Restoration.
Absolutely. Yes. Yep. So there's hope beyond that. Like there's, and the key to like the topic that you chose for today that God gave you is that you're never too far gone. Like out of everything that I had gone through, I really felt useless, worthless. I felt like the dirt under the bottom of somebody's shoe.
Right.
But look at how God was able to say, I'm going to use the worst parts of your life, some of the most embarrassing parts of your life that you never thought to share with anybody. But that's going to give you a message of hope that will deliver other people and let them know that, okay, you're going through a financial setback. I know the way out. Yeah. Okay, you've been molested. I know the way out. You've been trafficked. I know the way out. You've been in prison. I know the way out. It's like God has given me an arsenal of weapons. Like I have this treasure chest of this treasure chest of weapons that I can like pull out and say, I know how to do warfare for this because I've been there and God delivered me. It's not that I just was there, because I've seen people who have been trafficked and you can see it all over them. You see the hardness of life. And like I told you before we started, the biggest miracle for me, the biggest blessing is to not look like what I've gone through and for God to use me in such a way that I can smile and I can laugh and I can forgive and not hold that bitterness and be free from that.
And be free from that and be able to help others, because, there are people that have been through that continue to be scarred from it. Mm-hmm. We've encountered, I'm sure you have through the course of our time in ministry. I know I have encountered women that they just can't seem to feel worthy enough to be used by God or for God to deliver them because of what they went through.
Right.
And it's like the enemy has them trapped in their own body, their own mind, their own flesh, to think that they are too far gone for God. And, it's not like you just turn around and say to somebody, oh, you're not too far gone for God.
Right.
No, it's a process. For you, it was a process. You had to get through there. The one thing that resounds is that no matter how low you went, you always had thoughts of the Lord.
Yes. Yes.
You always, and but for women that don't know Christ, we know that the Bible says he will make a way out of no way
Yes.
in our lives. So someone could turn around and say, yeah, well, she grew up in church. Excuse me. She knew Christ. She had already developed a relationship. It doesn't matter. He is no respecter of person
Right.
in regards to going out, and he died for everyone. We all have the opportunity for salvation. There is not one that needs to think that they are left behind.
Right. Right.
If they're willing to give their life to Christ, if they're willing to surrender
Yes.
their heart over to him and make him Lord, then you're not going to, it's not a perfect walk. And that's the other thing that I appreciate that you talked about, is that even when they took your children, even when you were at your all-time low, you kept worshiping him. You kept praising, going to church, going to Bible study, being present, and isolating yourself from the world and just getting yourself into church and not doing it. Was it a struggle?
Yes. Yes, it was a struggle.
And that's where that failure, because you didn't address everything. You didn't deal with everything. But sometimes we don't know how to address everything, right?
We don't know. And one of the things that I always advocate for is, having a multitude of counselors. The Bible said when you have a multitude of counselors, there's safety.
Yes.
So I had my bishop, of course, I had therapy at the same time. And I just have one therapist, but I had two. I had one that was dealing with like the life issues, and I had one that was dealing with the family issues with my children. I went through parenting classes that was mandated by court, but I took that so serious, and I learned so much that I still have my certificate. Now, my certificate
that should be hanging in the most prominent place in your life.
Yes, it's right there, like right with my law degree and my, all of my other awards
absolutely.
and things. I am so proud of that, because I learned that even though I knew one day my children would come back, and even though he kept them from me for years, and it hurt, it really, as a mom, I know that you can't, it's like, that's just the worst thing you can do to a mother. And so when I finally was able to talk to them, I thought about this morning. I said, both my children, they reached out to me when they got into their senior year of high school.
Now, how old are your children?
So now I have a 23-year-old and an 18-year-old.
Oh, gosh.
My
you
18-year-old's
look like
going to
you're
be 19.
23 years old yourself. That's amazing.
Thank you. Look, this is the glory of God. Because after what I've been through, I have some grays, but I love my grays. I love them. And so, but both my children, when they reached out to me in their senior year of high school, I was so blessed to be able to have finally a relationship with them. And so for years I paid child support. He was the primary caregiver. And so he I know, and that's a whole nother story in and of itself. But
he went after you for child support.
Yes. And the ironic part of that is the reason he took them from me in the first place was because I finally gained enough courage to say to him, I'm going to take you to court for child support, because he wasn't supporting them. And he said, okay, I know how to get you. I'll take them and I'll make you pay me child support. And that's what he did. Now, that's a whole nother story. But for years,
where's the justice in that?
One of the reasons why I was so determined to go to law school, because he had 2 lawyers, I had none. And he was able to beat those cases because he had representation and I couldn't afford it. And so I know that there's a lot of justice involved. Like, there's a lot of justice to be served for women that are out there that are fighting these cases on their own. Yeah. Whole nother story. But when I thought about this morning, I said, Lord, you brought me through all of those years of paying child support to this man for my children, and for my children later on in life to tell me that, he was doing what he wanted to do with the money, and that they, to the degree that when they got to 17, 18 years old, 16, 17, 18, he stopped supporting them altogether. They had to figure it out on their own. He wasn't providing them with proper hygiene. They didn't know how to even take care of their own bodies. They were allowed to go to school for years without taking showers and bathing.
That's horrible.
And so it broke my heart hearing what they went through. Because in my mind, I thought, okay, surely he's doing everything that he can to be the best father ever to keep them. Because, I'm thinking, okay, this is his way of proving that he's good, that he's a good person. But when I heard their stories, it broke my heart. But I thought about all those years that I paid child support. And now I have my youngest son in college, and I'm able to put him through school. And I said to myself, well, I said to God, I said, all of those years, I felt I had to pay. I had to pay this man this money. Now I get to take care of my children. Now I get the opportunity. I'm blessed to be able to put money in their bank accounts, or to, well, not too much because I don't want to spoil them. As you can imagine, as a mother, when I finally got them back, I had to struggle with overcompensating. And so now with my youngest son in college in Vegas, I get the privilege of supporting him financially. And so God has a way of just healing us, because I could be bitter, I could be angry, and people would look at me and say, you have every right to be. But I know that God has a bigger plan.
Well, the Lord says vengeance is his. So as Christians, we don't have the right.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because who are we trusting? And I just admire that you understand that. And yeah, you could take matters into your own hands if you want to, because now you've got all the insight, the force, the training, the education. But that's not what you're about. That's not what your life is about. Your life is about being a living, breathing testament of God's goodness, his grace, and his glory. And I admire that. It's like you're this walking wealth of God's goodness and knowledge and experience. And I think that's the most important part that I find from your testimony in your life. It's that, you know what, you're not talking hearsay. You've been there. You've done that.
Right.
You've been processed through so many evil and wicked things in your life. You know, the enemy really had it in for you.
Oh, he did.
You know, he wanted to take you out.
But God knew what he was doing, because in the enemy, sometimes he doesn't fight fair.
No.
So he starts when we're young. He takes advantage of us in our most vulnerable state. But one thing that God reminded me, and I learned this through a masterclass teaching that I was a part of a few years ago. And one of the things that it was a class taught by Dr. Bynum, and one thing that she taught us, she said, God, he's the Alpha and the Omega. He's the beginning and the end. He never stops moving. He never, so and what the enemy does, because he knows that he's not the Alpha and the Omega.
Right.
Because he's not the beginning and the end. He can't create anything, and he can't end anything. He can't kill us, and he can't birth us. Only God can do that. So what the enemy will try to do is he messes with our minds in the middle. He messes with us in the middle and starts to get us to abort the process. He tries to convince us to take ourselves out of the game, so to speak, or take ourselves out of the race. And so one thing that I've learned over the years is that, God is always transforming us and restoring us and refreshing us. And one way that I thought about it was, you know how like when you have your computer and you hit the refresh button?
Yes.
And if you're refreshing something, sometimes something that wasn't there will populate.
Yes.
And so every time you refresh, it's something new. And I feel like God just refreshes me and refreshes us throughout the day. And he's constantly hitting that refresh button. And it's like every now and then we can look at ourselves and we see something that wasn't there. We see a resilience that might not have been there before.
Right.
We see a strength or a power that, like, I didn't think I'd be able to talk about this stuff. Like, I was afraid to talk to people and look people in this fact that I'm able to sit here across from you and look you in the eye and
Well, that's
talk
what
to
I'm saying. From like
It's
when
a
I met
miracle.
you in 2019 till 2023, the process of your testimony and your ability to talk about it has prolifferated, because
That's God.
when I first heard and you only talked a little bit about it, and so I had a little bit of insight. So when we were starting to to create that human trafficking organization, I had little bits and pieces, and then you went out and you spoke about it at our first meeting, and I stood there thinking like, wait, she didn't say that. Wait. And it was just this awakening. And then, COVID came, of course, but then I could see you on social media and you're blossoming, and I could see you talk about it. I'm like, she is comfortable in her shoes right now. And it was just beautiful to see that transition from this very introverted, shy, quiet individual. I knew you were powerful, because when you would start talking about your visions and your dreams and what you wanted to do, you would light up.
Yeah.
But you just sort of kept your testimony just at bay.
Yeah.
Just enough to say what you needed to say to make your point. I just love, and I think it's powerful and important and so necessary that you continue to share your testimony, because we have women out there, we have children, we have men out there that are suffering on the hands of someone else, and they don't know how to break away.
Right. And that's one of the things I know God has given me a purpose and a calling to do, to be able to show people the way out, because we don't know, especially when you're in it. You're just in survival mode. And I know what that feels like. You're not, and a lot of times people might come your way to try to help you and give you insight or put wisdom, little seeds of wisdom. And at the moment, sometimes we're too broken to be able to even hear it or receive it. I can't tell you how many times I encountered somebody who you need to get away from him, or
well, even I said to you, well, wait, why did you stay there? If you were able to get away and walk out of that, why did you stay?
Yeah.
And you're like, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, and there's so many women who are in abusive relationships, and unfortunately, so many of us have gone through it. But I'm sure many can tell the testimony of how many times they tried to leave, or how many times they left and went back. And statistics show that there's a certain amount of times, and it varies, of course, but generally speaking, there's a certain amount of times before a woman will leave permanently, because there will be something that will always kind of
Draw
reel
her back.
in. And men who are unfortunately are so broken that they become abusers.
And it doesn't necessarily have to be physical.
Right. Because for me, it started off very verbal and
Because
emotional.
I know someone that we could see it was a mental thing. It was, this person would say something and it was just trigger the individual to go back.
Yep.
And no matter what anybody would say, this person had power over that individual.
Yep. And so even when people might, do things to try to help the person, even with my husband, as working for years as a New York State trooper, he told me stories about how they would get calls for domestic violence or, different things going on in the home. And when they get there, it would be the woman that when they would put the man in handcuffs, the woman would, no, don't
My
take
son
him.
tells me that too.
And so-
he has told me that. He said, Mom, it's crazy because, here she's got broken nose, bloody this, bloody, but she doesn't want to press charges.
And
She
they'll
doesn't
fight
want
the officer.
Yeah, they yeah.
And I can relate to that. I know what it feels like when you are so confused about the power that you have, when you're so confused about your identity, when you're so confused about who you are in Christ, or even if you don't know Christ yet and you're just somebody who you don't understand your worth or your value.
Yeah.
And you tie everything into this person, and you think that this is the only person that will love you, that will protect you, that will care for you, because you go through those honeymoon stages or the sweetheart phases where they'll do something horrible and then they'll shower you with gifts and affection, and you start to get confused and you wonder, like, okay, if I leave, is this the moment that he's going to be changed? Like, after all of these years of me staying and after everything that I went through with this person, somebody else is going to get him, and then he's going to be this wonderful person after I put in all the work.
To somebody else after yes.
We tell ourselves all of these things, and that's why I know that that's part of my purpose, is to share with women, not only is there a way out, but this is how you can get out. Like, these are some steps that you can take, and it's different for everybody. There's, generally speaking, there are some, things that we can all do to try to help ourselves to get to a mental place where we see the worth that we have, that we see our own value, and that we see that there's purpose beyond this situation, because we can get attached to trauma. We can get attached to pain. It becomes a part of our identity.
Yes. It seems that way, that you just somehow make it a part of your identity. This is my life.
Yeah.
I have no control.
Right.
I can't do this. Is what
So
my
you
life
just,
is right now. I
settle
can't do
into it.
Yeah. And it's not. And it's not always easy, but I have learned something really powerful even this year, because there's, like I said, prayer is vital.
Yes.
So, I know if you talk to my husband, he'll say to me, I know I'm not dead, or I wasn't killed as a teenager, because I know my mom was praying for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I know God was protecting me.
Yeah.
And praying for this one and praying. And I, had a situation where I prayed for a very long time, and the Lord answered that prayer this year. And for us, it's like, we want God to do it right then and there.
Mm-hmm.
But we now have eyes to see why it couldn't happen right then and there.
Right.
There was a process of things that had to happen
Right.
for
Had
this
to.
individual to get to the place where they are today.
Right.
And in that process, we just continued to pray, stand in faith. When it would get hard, we would press, get before the Lord and just continue to pray. We would, and sometimes we wanted to go to the individual and say, hey, this is what, and it's like, no, don't say anything.
Don't say a word. Yeah.
Don't say a word. I'm still working.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we see the fruition of the full deliverance right before us.
Yeah.
And it's like we tried our own self out of our own natural to help, and we couldn't. And it was just take your hands off, believe, trust the Lord,
Yes.
speak his word over these individuals, and in his timing, he will make it right, but 100%. So at some point, you were delivered 100% where you didn't go back,
Right.
where you haven't fallen.
And I believe that sometimes, like, that process is so important, because I believe that if I had not gone through what I had gone through, the way that God uses me now, the boldness that he has in me now, I think it came from being able to survive all of those things, to talk about it, to be able to help other people, because there's a lot of people that need to know, like, do you know what it's like? Can you minister to me from a place of experience?
And I think that's a problem. I think we are looking on the outside and saying, we're not in your shoe. Well, why did you stay? He left the house, grab your kids and run.
Yeah.
But we don't know all of the disconnect. Like he took the wires and he went click, 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 and disconnected your wiring.
Yes, yes.
To understand your capability, your power, your strength, your identity, everything. They disconnect everything.
Right.
And so they take all those wires and they connect it to them. So I am your source. I am this. I am, and I am understanding that now more than ever. I had a sense of it, but just having this conversation, that's how it triggered in my brain. Now it makes sense why it took so long. But then you said something that's key also. Something in you broke.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I always say, when I hear that, I believe that is God's finished work.
Yes. Oh, yes. I got chills just now. Absolutely.
In your life. Okay, daughter. Done. Enough. You're ready.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And that is such a good way to put it, because when I was talking to the Lord this morning, he revealed to me, he said, look, when I'm finished, it's when I say it's finished, it's finished. But there's a process that we go through first. And so the good thing about that is that when he says it's over, there's like because there were times I tried to mess up. I like with the whole prison situation, like, the stuff that I had reverted back to, it was like, okay, I got a way out of this. You're not going to go back to the streets. You're not going to go back to the way things were. I'm going to put it into this. I'm going to bring you to a dead halt and put you in prison, and then I'm going to show you your purpose while you're there. And when you come out, you're going to be a powerhouse. And so
a painful process.
But
look at what it's done for you today.
Finished. Like, I'm finished, so you're finished. Yes. So you can't go any further. It's like, it's like a bungee cord. It's like you can only go but so far. He's going to make sure you bounce right back up. It's like, no, you're not going to fall. You're not going to hit the ground. And he had me. He really did. And one thing that I think is key to the topic that you chose is that there's also hope for the people who hurt us. Those people.
That's another story. That's another thing that we have to talk about.
Right, because, at this stage in my life, I'm grateful that the Lord has me in a place of maturity, in a place of a healed place, to where I can look back at people like my children's father and say, I believe that one day he's going to be saved. I believe one day he's going to recognize that all these years that I could have retaliated, or all the years that I could have done something else or tried to fight him back, and maybe he's going to see that, you know what, maybe I want to know the God that she serves. I want to know why she didn't break down, why I couldn't break her, why I couldn't destroy her. What is it about this God that she was insisting on serving and believing? Because there was, he would say things that would, put down the church, or, he would express his disdain for the faith. But I believe that one day he is going to be saved. Like one day he got sick, somewhere towards like the middle part of after he took the children, some years went by, and then he let me start to see them for a little bit. Because it would, that's control. Every now and then you can see them and then he'll cut it off.
Just see.
But at this particular point, he got sick and was in the hospital and had to have surgery. And while he was in the hospital, I visited him and I prayed with him. And I asked him, I said, do you have a relationship with God yet? Because he was really scared. It was serious. And he said, no. I said, are you open to receiving, Christ in your life?
What a testimony.
And he said, yes. And I prayed the prayer of salvation with him, and he accepted the Lord then. And some, years passed, and, old behaviors would resurface. But then I said to myself, I remember when after I gave my life to Christ, and I kept messing up. And so in my heart, I said, I believe that one day he's going to totally surrender to God. And all of his children are going to look at him and say, if God can save him, then that's going to be the catalyst for generations, because he has a lot of children.
Yeah. He lived the life that you said.
But if God is able to lift him up out of that darkness and save him, I can only imagine the miracles that will trickle down to his children.
You put the seed in.
Yeah,
God does the
one
work.
plants, one waters. God is going to give the increase.
Absolutely.
And so I'm believing God. And so for God to do that in me, because I know it's not me, it's just God, teaching us how to serve him, how to be more Christ-like. And I'm just grateful. I'm like, okay, Lord, I could be praying to you saying, Lord, get him. But I'm like, Lord, save him.
And that's the thing that's really key, because, as a victim, you want somebody to pay.
Yeah.
And in that you build this hatred towards this person.
Oh, yeah.
And you want them to pay. And when you hear that bad things happen to them, the natural, ungodly, unsaved part of you says, well, they got what they deserve. Well, you know what? You didn't get what you deserve. We didn't get what we deserve.
Exactly.
So who are we to say they got what they deserve?
Right.
And I think oftentimes we don't heal the part of us that's the victim.
Yeah,
it took me
that's
years
good.
To heal from my abuser. And every time, that name would come up, something inside of me would just be like, I don't know if I can. As an adult, as a woman, I would tear that woman apart. I will just shred her to pieces. And so even when I got born again, if I heard her name or if it was mentioned, it was like this sensation, like, and I kept saying, well, hopefully she's in hell, and you don't heal. But then I went through a part of a time in my life where I had to do some self-reflecting, because I just felt like there was just something hindering my journey and my walk with Christ. And I realized that I was holding so much resentment still. I said I forgave the woman when I got born again and when I came to know Christ, but I didn't forgive her totally. Like I held this resentment for the years that I felt she robbed me.
Yeah.
She robbed my life. And I had to go through a process where I had to just realize, wait, that was under the rug.
It's still there.
It just showed up.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lord. But it was through a time of prayer, journaling, reflecting, really turning myself inside out, where I realized I'm being affected by this. And I just think that there are so many women that are not victims, that were victims, that haven't dealt with the victimization, if there's such a word, that they dealt with. That, that whoever their abuser was in whatever format, they've built hatred over the years.
Yeah.
And, I admire the women that don't have that hatred, that understand they need prayer. That is the epitome of a person that needs the Lord more than ever.
The epitome, yes. Yeah.
Right.
And we know that firsthand because we were the result of their actions. Like we were, the things that they did, they inflicted that. Yeah. And so we know how deep it goes. Yeah. Right. And one thing that helped me over the years is the Lord just took me back and said, just like you have a story, he has a story.
Yeah.
He didn't just wake up one day and said, I want to be evil. He didn't just wake up one day and said, I want to abuse women. Something happened to him. And then I started to remember the stories he told me about his childhood. And then I remembered that he was molested as a child by his babysitter. And then I remembered that he was when he was stabbed or when he stabbed another young kid on the playground as a kid, and the stories of his dad having children outside of the marriage and abandoning him and going on and moving on with his new wife and their children and abandoning him and his siblings. And I realized at such a young age he lost control, and so over the years he's been scrambling. Grasping at straws,
Yes,
trying to control everyone else around him, and that's
sure.
his.
I mean, everybody's got a story.
Yeah.
And everybody is a byproduct of, before Christ, they are a byproduct
Right.
of their environment, of the people that have charge over their life. And we now, looking back, can say we understand that young women that are still trying to figure their identity, I want you to just sort of look into that camera and we have our listeners can also hear. How would you encourage a young woman or a young man today that is dealing with someone abusing them through control, through mind games, or through physical, through whatever? What are the words that you can put out to them today to just encourage them?
Absolutely. One of the first things I want you to know is that you are valuable and you are worth. See, the Bible compares your worth, your value is more than all the wealth in this whole world. The scripture says, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul? So your soul, there's something valuable in you, and the enemy sees that, and so he's not going to try to rob an empty vault. And so because of the value that you carry, that's why you're dealing with all of this trauma. That's why you're dealing with all this adversity and all the things that are coming up against you to fight you and fight the promise that's in you and fight your purpose. It's because there's something valuable that you carry that only you can do in this life. You are here for a reason, and only you can do it. There's some reason that God specifically had you come into this life to be able to live out an assignment. And that assignment it will not stop. It's going to come out. It's going to come forth. And the moment that you decide that enough is enough and you give your life to the Lord, or you decide, I'm tired of this, I don't want to live like this anymore, you are totally in control. You are in control of your destiny. You can leave that situation. And even if you feel, I don't have the tools or the means or the resources to leave right now, I don't have the money to leave right now, I want you to understand that there is help out there for you. There are places that you can call. There are places that you can go. There are places that even if you just go online and you search out the help that you need, there are some things that might be out there that you might not have ever seen before, that you ever heard of before. And so I want you to be encouraged that there are resources for you. There's someone that you can talk to. And even if you're watching this, then you have access to internet, and so you have access to social media and things of that nature. So I want you to be able to email Pastor Carmen or reach out to me if you need any help, if you just want someone that is listening, or if you just want to write out your story and say, look, this is what I'm going through, because that's healing in and of itself, getting it out and sharing what you're dealing with, because I'm telling you, you are not alone. I know what it's like. I know what it feels like to be bound even within yourself and to not be sure about what you're here to do and who you are. But I'm telling you, there is purpose for you. And I would even imagine, I would say that there's probably a good chance that what you're going through is part of that purpose. And so you're going to be able to come out of this and help so many women, even men. Men go through some things too that you're afraid to talk about. You might be afraid to open up. But I'm telling you that God doesn't waste any moments. He doesn't waste any opportunities. He will use this for his glory. And you'll be amazed and surprised at how strong you feel and how powerful you feel when you come out and you're able to share it and you're able to heal. But there is healing for you and there is hope for you. I'm proof that it's possible. Amen. To go from prison to being able to practice law. That in and of itself shows you how God can turn the biggest mess into one of the biggest messages of hope. I'm not someone who constantly goes around saying, if I can do it, you can do it too. But I do say, because it's hard, it takes a lot of work. But I do say that if I can do it, it's proof that it's possible. It's proof that there is a door that is waiting for you. Your path may not be law. Your path may not be pastoring. Your path may not be being an author. But whatever it is, I want you to be encouraged to do what's in you, because it's something in you that needs to come out, and the enemy is trying to stop it. But he won't win. And I speak that over your life. He will not win. You are victorious in Christ, and God has a purpose for your life.
Amen. Thank you so much. I just, want to say to our listeners, listen, we're here for you. Don't feel like you're alone. It's never too late for God to recover you. There's always a plan and a purpose for our lives. We were predestinated, preordained. And so I would just say, like Mary said, reach out to us. Reach out to us. You can call the church at 203-386-9854, and we will put you in the right steps. I will connect with Mary. If you want to connect with her, I will give you her information if you don't have it. Get yourself on the right track. I believe in you. I believe in God's plans and purpose. And we know this because we both have been through not similar at all. I'm not even comparing myself in any way to what she went through, but we all have our story, like I said. So, and God saw us through it. And here we are today. So that's all the time that we have. I just want to thank you for listening and viewing us this morning. If you are watching us through our YouTube channel, make sure you subscribe and like us. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, make sure you subscribe to our channel. Thank you. God bless you. This is Pastor Carmen from Love Talk. Until the next time, God bless you. If you enjoyed our show, please rate and review us on your favorite podcast. Until then, this is Pastor Carmen Acosta from Love Talk, where the conversations will always be real, raw, and relevant. This podcast was created by Ladies of Virtue. It was produced, recorded, and edited by Ray Torres. Love Talk is a product of Covenant Life Ministries.